What's good, family? It's your boy Big L with uh, another book discussion, man. I have been walking through Dr. Claud Anderson's Black Labor, White Wealth classic joint, man, that every person, particularly every black person, should be reading and studying this. And if you can notice, man, by looking at it, man, I got red ink all over this joint. Uh, this particular book here, as a quick recap, and hopefully you've watched part one and part two of this book discussion. I think it's imperative that we begin to have these type of discussions. Black Labor, White Wealth is explaining how blacks have got into their current situation. Now, he has another book called Powernomics, which gives a very detailed plan on how we as black folks can get out of the situation that we're in. Okay, I recommend, I cannot stress the importance of this book, man. And I decided to do this book discussion as a way of helping those who may not have time to sit back and read, and who may be traveling or whatever the case may be. Just this will be a companion to that, and they'll be able to give you some of the highlights, man. Ending part two of this particular discussion, I stopped at a particular part, man, where we were about to go into discussing slavery. And one of the things that I enjoyed about Dr. Claud Anderson and the method of which he breaks down the issue of where blacks are is that he doesn't place a whole lot of, it's not a whole lot of finger pointing taking place. He lays it out straight, raw, uncut, places out there, man, for people to grasp and to gather. And he makes it so simple and so clear that it's really difficult for people to leave reading this book without having a desire to put solutions in place. Okay? So let me start here. The root problem in black communities across America is race and the unjust distribution of our nation's wealth, power, and resources. Okay? This monopoly of control resulted directly from centuries of abusive exploitation and expropriation of the labor of the darker race, Black Americans of African descent. Though Black Americans reside in the richest nation on earth, their standard of living is comparable to that of a third world nation. Their standard of living is comparable to that of a third world nation. Here's what really got me, man, and what's really pricked some things in my mind to make me want to go out and research and look for answers further, was this line right here. Blacks own and control less than 2% of the wealth, power, and resources of this nation. So they have little control over their lives and conditions in which they are forced to live. Current statistics state that in the year 2015, the buying power of blacks will be $1 trillion. $1 trillion. But here's where I had to begin to research and think critically and ask some pretty difficult questions and really get to the heart of this. When he states this, blacks own and control less than 2% of the wealth and power of resources. Own and control less than 2%. But less than 2% of the wealth and power in this country, $1 trillion in buying power. less than 2% of the wealth and power in this country. $1 trillion buying power. That can only mean one thing, that we have not spent our money wisely. Means that we spent more times being consumers than producers. That we spend our money, our $1 trillion in buying power on other people, other races, which have allowed them to control 98% of the power and wealth in this country. That's unbelievable. You understand? Both the disparity between white and black living conditions and inequitable allocation of resources are century-old problems. And here's where it gets good. They are a major legacy of the peculiar institution called slavery. It was that social system, slavery, that a white patriarchal society co-signed blacks to live in the most inhumane conditions during the harshest labor and without just compensation. Now, we discussed this, and I've discussed it before, man. When I did the video earlier today on what is white supremacy, I touched on this. I touched on the fact of how blacks built this country, how this country was built on the backs of blacks, how we are the builders of this country, that we put in the work, but we were never compensated economically for the work that we've done because of the peculiar institution of slavery. The living conditions of a people enslaved or free tend to reflect their status and power within a larger society. When you look at our status in Black America, our conditions reflect the unjust way this country has done us over generations and places in this situation because of the peculiar institution of slavery, man. Here's this right here. I'm on page 11. A slave's life was committed to producing wealth and comfort for white masters. The slaves suffered in silence, but routinely asked in their prayers and work songs, "When will life get better for us, Lord?" The sad part about it is we, their descendants, are still waiting for those same answers. We're waiting to find out and to hear, when will it get better for us? One of the first lessons that free blacks learned was that without money and power, freedom for a black-skinned person was freedom in theory only. They were still bound by their conditions and non-white skin color. The larger society kept them bound by making black skin color a badge of inferiority and degradation. Blacks who escaped the plantations were not permitted to escape the boundaries of their own flesh. In reality, the socio-economic conditions for blacks outside of slavery were only slightly better than those within the slavery system. That being a free black person meant you were quasi-free. A black person is free as long as they could prove he was free, as long as he could do things to provide for his family and for himself. Then there was freedom. Well, because of the fact that he didn't have no dough, no money, no prosperity was limited, uh, he was only quasi-free. He was in the same predicament, essentially, as he was on the plantation. Here, but here's what happened, man, after the so-called freedom. Local ordinances and social sanctions in North and South restricted free blacks from earning competitive incomes. Their labor was sold for just barely above the cost of slave labor. Without sufficient income, few were able to secure decent food, healthcare, and housing. They remained legally free, but sought safe haven in large urban areas. So we were given this freedom, okay? The supposed freedom. So you have these people who were brought to this country, placed in slavery, placed on a plantation, okay? Then their whole mentality and the whole lifestyle was dependent on the slave culture. They weren't able to earn a way to survive or provide. Then they're given their freedom, so they're outside of the slave culture. They have the will and the want to work hard to build a way of life for them and their family. But because there was laws created and put in place, they weren't able to do that. So they were able to live off of the plantation, outside of the plantation. But because of the way the laws and white supremacy set it up, everything was connected to slavery still. So you had the same rules and regulations, essentially, just outside of quote unquote slavery. The Emancipation Proclamation and subsequent constitutional amendments legally freed all blacks and granted them citizenship. But here's the key. But without social and economic resources, these newly granted rights amounted to little more than paper rights. Since free blacks could not find work, were denied public assistance, and often could not leave the country, they had no choice. Now here's where it gets crazy. They had no choice but to accept what the dominant society offered them, sharecropping, which was only but another form of servitude controlled by white plantation owners. So you would get free by get freedom, get off the plantation, or have the ability to get off the plantation, but because of the way the laws are set up, because you didn't have any type of funds, any type of money to build outside of the plantation, you are forced to go back into a servant type relationship with the very people who were probably once your masters. There was no light at the end of the tunnel. There was no hope. 130 years after slavery, American society has become more pluralistic and competitive, but blacks' marginal conditions remain relatively unchanged. In some respects, man, they've worsened. The socioeconomic inequalities that existed between whites and blacks during and shortly after slavery are now structural. Now, in the video that I did earlier today that I posted up on my YouTube channel was what is white supremacy? And what I was conveying was this very message. Because of the way slavery was set up, once we got our quasi-freedom and became quasi-free, we entered into a form of systematic structural racism known as white supremacy. it, listen, I don't know about you, but it blows my mind when I think of how we were stolen, we were kidnapped, brought to this country, okay? Everything was taken from us. Our family structures, our identity, our culture, our free will, or not our free will. You still had free will, but it operated in a certain parameter where you were only able to do certain things within your free will. Then you get the paper freedom. So then you're of outside of the plantation, but you go right back into sharecropping. And what sharecropping was essentially you were able to live on the master's land, and it gave you it gave you some land for you to grow a particular crop. And based off of how much you grow or the agreement that you had with the particular, shareholder or the share owner or the master, you were able to grow a particular crop and take some of what you've grown and sell it to be able to provide for your family. But when the share owner, the slave master, got a wild hair across his behind, he can take more of that particular share that you own. He can, any time he wanted to, up the agreements. He can sabotage your crops. He can raise the amount of crops that you own and say that you own more. He had the ability, because you still only had paper rights. You had no one on your side, no one to stand up for you. You weren't able to build a community for you to be able to protect yourself. You still were in the same damn situation. So at any given moment, these folks can do whatever they wanted to you and make your life just as miserable. So if he, got into an argument with his wife, he can go down to your spot where you sharecrop and take out his frustrations from his wife on you. And since you had no rights, there was no laws put in place to protect you, you were at his beck and call whenever he wanted to do. And I say this, there's a real thin line, man, between what we see in sharecropping and what we see taking place today. Because it's very similar. If you work, and 98% of Blacks in this country work for someone who's white, whether it be government or corporation, 98%. Only 2% of Blacks in this country own and control their own businesses. Okay, only 2%. So to this very day, you're very much in a very similar situation. So when someone who works in a white company, if they get frustrated and get mad at you, you can get fired because they don't like something you said, the way you wear your hair, the way you wear your beard, your clothing, your tattoos, whatever it may be. Not only can they fire you, but they can prevent you from getting a job in the first place. That's very, very close, man. This is immense similarities between that and sharecropping. Very, 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 very. The next section of this book begins to talk about the conservative forces, the bane of Black society. But I'm not going to go into that aspect right now because there's some information in there that I really need to tackle and to give you and to break down further. But I think this particular section, when we talked about slavery and the impact of slavery on Black America today, let me give you an example. Okay, it's a monopoly example that I often use. Every other person in this country, every other race or culture in this country, when they come, they're given $200 for them to go around, and a way for them to go around the board. Okay, and when they go around the board, because they have $200, or the amount of money that you get when you start Monopoly, because they have that amount of money, they're able to go around and buy property. They're able to actually get into the economic game. Blacks are able to go around the Monopoly board, but they were never giving their money to participate in the actual economic game. Even in times where we actually went around that Monopoly board and gained economic status and created socioeconomic infrastructure, such as the many different Black Wall Streets, whether it be the one in Tulsa, whether it be Rosewood, whether it be a host of others. There was always something from white supremacy that came through and destroyed that. Always something. But we've always been playing from behind in this game, in this capitalistic society. Black folks have always played from behind, but there's a way for us no longer to have to play from behind. We can begin to build our own socioeconomic infrastructure, man, our own businesses, support one another, build up a community, because right now all Blacks have is neighborhoods. We build up a community where we begin to build businesses. Then once we have that in order, we begin to pool our resources, and then we begin to take care of the education system in our communities. We decide whether we want to participate in the political system, whether it be to rent a candidate or to buy a candidate. And then we begin to build up. But we have to work together. We have to work together, man. It's imperative that we get on the same page and work together. It's imperative. So the next section, man, from Dr. Claud Anderson's book, Black Labor, White Wealth, I'm going to be going into talking about the conservative forces that have always been a hindrance to Black America, that has prevented us from going further, man. I actually encourage you to get this book, man, and to read it and read it and read it and read it and study it, because there's some good stuff in this joint, man, that will help you come to a better understanding of where we are. This is your boy, Big L, man. I love you. I appreciate you. Let's continue to build together, man. Support each other, man. Support each other. You are better and bigger than what they say you are. We're going to be all right. I love you. We out.